Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. I'm very excited to have Dinesh D'Souza back on the show. He's the author and producer of the new book and movie, Vindicating Trump. We have a lot to discuss about this election, but I'm going to open this episode with an apology. So, for the first time in my life, I had the date wrong for this interview. You were waiting yesterday, DM'd me, your producer's like, "What's up?" I've never done that before or since. I feel mortified, but I'm going to take this opportunity when someone does something wrong to make something right because I don't like feeling guilt. What is your favorite charity?
Oh gosh, I mean, I don't know if I have a favorite charity. Well, one that Debbie and I support is called the City of David Foundation. It's actually based in Israel. It does biblical archaeology, and
Oh,
it's amazing. It's really fascinating. So we support those guys.
so I'm going to send them a contribution of $250. We're going to put my receipt on the screen, and I will encourage people to contribute as well. So instead of me feeling guilty, I will feel we kind of nudge the world in a better direction. I don't have to feel bad going forward. So let's turn a negative into a positive. And speaking of negative, uh, I have a long question, but you're going to give a long answer because this is something I think this is the central question of this year. Uh, I've been very critical of what I call Greta Thunberg conservatives. This idea that every 4 years, if we don't win this election, the conservatives or Republican Party, it's the end of America. If Romney doesn't win, he's going to save us. If McCain doesn't win, he's going to, so on and so forth. And I think things are a little different this year. And one of the reasons I think things are a little different this year is because I, like you, I'm a big student of history. And Woodrow Wilson, who I regard as the worst president of all time, I'm sure he's pretty high on your list of terrible presidents as well. He had the excuse of the Great War to implement massive authoritarianism within the states, imprisoning political opponents, wage controls, press control. It was really overnight something that would have been unimaginable as recently as like 1910. And because the American people went through this as a result of war, when FDR came into office 12 years later, people really couldn't complain because, hey, we did this already. Is the Great Depression really any worse than a Great War? This is happening here. And FDR did all sorts of things that, by today's standards, we would have regarded as insane. I had tweeted out that COVID and the lockdowns, by design or otherwise, have given some very negative people some very useful information about the limits of American docility and what people would put up with. And we saw this it's going to be, they're going to cash in their chips. And we saw this happening in Canada, and we're seeing it happening right now as you and I speak in Scotland and the UK, where people are being imprisoned over social media tweets or comments. And this isn't being done secretly. They are boasting about it, often with the support of um, their countrymen. So, are you as concerned about where we stand as a country? I mean, it's kind of a leading question, but I would love to hear your thoughts as to if you regard my reasoning as solid there.
I have several thoughts about all this. One is that Reagan used to say that every generation is sort of one generation away from losing freedom. And I remember not fully comprehending what Reagan meant by that, because I thought we've had a relatively secure America. And while there is a large arena of political debate and controversy, our basic rights as enumerated in the Bill of Rights seem secure enough. They don't seem like they're on the table. They're not even up for public referendum. But look how quickly, not one or two, but really all of our basic rights came under curtailment under COVID. And then, interestingly, as you point out, an effort to push beyond the crisis and keep the censorship, keep the mass surveillance, keep a lot of the restrictions, or at least adapt them into, we were previously restricting, quote, disinformation, even though, quite frankly, most of the disinformation in COVID was coming from the government, right? Rochelle Walensky, if you take the vaccine, you can't get COVID, you can't give it to someone. Even Fauci recently admitting that the 6-foot social distancing rule was made up. There was no science behind it. There were no studies behind it. I mean, what a stunning thing to say. And yet, what it makes you realize is that these people do things that appear to be irrational on the surface, but there's almost always a goal or
Yep.
motive. The motive here was to change the rules of the 2020 election,
Yes.
because you can't vote in the normal way if you got to stand 6 feet away from the next guy. That's why millions of mail out ballots, millions of mail in drop boxes, all that stuff came as a result of the we can't have a normal election. And so Fauci paved the way for that. And that was the political purpose of that type of deception. You know, Obama said again in 2008 that he was going to remake America. And once again, I thought, as somebody who had been enjoying the fruits of American freedom, well, look, this is a big country. This is not Venezuela. You cannot
Yeah.
take America down in 4 years, or even if you have 8 years, it's not going to work. But what I didn't realize is that what Obama really envisioned is a remaking of critical institutions, the
Yes. Yeah.
FBI, the CIA, so that you would have the intelligence agencies of the government now working hand in hand with the Democrats to rig future elections, to change the way in which information is made available through things like digital censorship. Suddenly, people from the FBI start showing up as the chief legal counsel at Twitter. So this kind of infiltration is something that, well, I mean, Marxists and communists do this kind of stuff, and yet it's a little startling to see the headway that they've made in America in a relatively short time.
But are you the what I'm most concerned about is Tim Walz, because after that debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, she seemed to me more of a, non-ideological hack who'll just say what she needs to say to get ahead, and she's out of a puppet of a machine, which is not something I'm particularly fond of. But he seems to be the ideologue. And the ideologues are the ones who are the dangerous ones. They're the ones who really revel in that the authoritarianism and the sadism. As someone born in the Soviet Union, he set up a snitch line during COVID. And when you're encouraging people to turn in their countrymen, I don't know if I'm sure you just saw there was this kid who turned in his dad over January 6th, and now he's been making the rounds as a great hero. This is straight out of the Soviet Union. There's a story called Pavlik Morozov, who turned in his parents because I think they were hoarding grain or something. And all the kids in the Soviet Union are taught this story about how valorous this you should if you see something, say something, call the cops on your parents. And we also saw this during the trucker situation in Canada. I don't know if you were aware of this, but the police were saying this is not a safe place for children, although there was no violence or crime. This wasn't, like Seattle or Portland. And they were saying, if you bring your kids and the dad wants to have his son or daughter, you know what I mean? We're going to start taking your kids away from you. And the media cheered this on, how wonderful this was. So I'm curious your thoughts as to what I just said.
Well, what it really shows you is I would call it the joys of tyranny. And
Yeah,
by
yeah,
that, I mean, we think of tyranny as something, painful. Tyranny is the executioner who is reluctantly chopping off some heads. He doesn't really want to do it, but it's a socially necessary task. And we forget that tyranny is the exercise of power of one man over another. And having another man in your complete grasp, where they are at your beck and call, at your mercy. This is something that is peculiarly delightful. I think it was actually part of the pleasure of being a slave owner. It wasn't simply that you got work that was done for free by some other guy, but it was the idea that he had to come to you if you wanted to get married, to get your permission. You had to
yeah,
give your blessing,
yeah,
otherwise it's not going to happen. You had the right to buy and sell the guy, which is a particularly exciting idea. So what I'm getting at is that the other point to remember is that a tyrant, however bloodthirsty, cannot rule a whole country by himself. It's just not possible. You have to create a massive gang to do it. And that means that the pleasures of tyranny have to be franchised down to the local level. So we're not used to seeing these sorts of things in this country because of checks and balances, separation of powers, the kind of beautiful architecture of the American founding. But as we move away from that, and as people trample roughshod over that, we begin to see the tyrannical habit of mind, if you will, even here in this country. So yes, I agree with that. I agree with the psychology of it. And I agree that tyranny has a great appeal to people. The idea, think of it in this way: the small time tyrant, the person, let's just say, who wears a mask today, in public or at the airport and gives dirty looks or even comes up to you and starts screaming at you if you don't have a mask, that is the modern equivalent of the village busybody. That's
Yeah.
the moral equivalent of the person in a small village who would look into people's windows and start screaming at them. That habit of mind persists even though we are a long way from the old village.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm happy to educate you about it. In North Korea, that busybody is actually formally institutionalized. So every apartment building complex has it's usually a middle-aged woman, and it's her job to keep track of who's coming and going. And if you have someone of your house, she will sit you down, and this is her prerogative. It's not like it's inappropriate. This is her job to find out who's been at your house, why are they staying over, and to keep track of everyone's coming and going. So to your point, again, when people think of tyranny in America, very naively, they think it's some crazy person with a mustache banging a desk and shouting like a lunatic. No, it's Karen. It's someone who has, for the first time in their life, has that little bit of power and revels in the fact that she has something over you. And maybe it's, I'm not going to get your medication. Maybe I'm not going to, check some form that you need. But that little bit of power is very, very pervasive and dark. And and the media makes you a hero for turning in your neighbor. I mean, it was encouraged, and again to this day is something that's regarded as heroic.
I think that Americans are very unsuspecting about
Yeah,
all this.
yeah,
And that's why people in other countries who have lived hard lives, they expect gangsterism.
yeah.
They're not too surprised if the cop pulls out plants evidence on somebody or pulls out a truncheon and starts beating you for no reason. They know it actually gives some pleasure to the cop to do that. But Americans are in the position that Alexander Solzhenitsyn describes at the beginning of the Gulag Archipelago, where he says that really when the Gulag was first established, every time they came to arrest you, people would helplessly bleat out, "Why me? I haven't done anything. Here, let me explain. You've got the wrong guy,"
Yeah.
not realizing that, no, look, they don't care. Your name is on
Right.
the list. It doesn't matter what you did. Convincing this guy is not going to do any good. So Americans are in the position now where if I tell them that this guy did nothing wrong, or he was in the vicinity of the Capitol but he didn't even go inside,
Yeah.
and yet there was an FBI raid on his home and helicopters over his house, they look at me like I must be insane. They're thinking like, that can't possibly happen to me. So there is this sort of naive, wide-eyed, it doesn't happen here. Even if it does happen here, it won't happen to me. It's the wildebeest mentality that hopes that if there is a lion and if there is a panther, he will. Perhaps there isn't one, but if there is one, he's going to land on somebody else and not on me.
Folks, I want to talk to you about Lumen, which is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs, and it gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management. All you got to do, breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. Then it gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. Your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food you eat into fuel that keeps you going. Do you want to be an underwear model like me or just look like one? Well, Lumen will help you achieve those goals. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, if you want to have recommendations that improve your metabolic health and give you information about what it is that your body is doing that'll help you improve your energy and give you better sleep and so much more, go to lumen.me/malice to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/malice for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. Let's get back to the show. Let's turn tax to talk about your book and your film. I think conservatives, as a rule, don't know how to take a win. That when something goes their way, they're kind of oblivious about it, and it's not like the New York Times is going to say, "Well, you guys got us this time," and you have the big victory. And I'll say something specific, which is if it was a year ago, and I had said, I think Trump sucks. He's a mediocre president. He shouldn't have been in the Oval Office. I give him a C minus. I would be regarded as a Trump supporter. because unless you say he's the worst thing that's ever happened to America and every aspect of everything about him is horrific, you're supporting him. If you voted for Jill Stein, oh, you're a Trump supporter. It's just, this really was the logic, and it was pervasive. But then after the assassination attempt, and everyone saw, how he reacted to that with just insane, I don't know, adrenaline courage, or whatever you want to call it. When you have people like Mark Zuckerberg saying, that's awesome. When you have CEOs like Elon Musk and Mark Andreessen saying they support Trump, these people have not been rendered radioactive. They're not being read out of town in a rail. And I think in 1 year, this has been a massive change. That support for him a year ago would have been like, maybe it's time to call CPS on your kids. And now it's, okay, you're an idiot, I hate you, but it's nowhere near as deranged as it was a year ago.
I agree that there's been a big shift. And I think the reason is, well, the good thing about Trump's reaction to both assassination attempts is in a class by itself. Let's talk about the second one, because that was in some ways even more outrageous than the first.
Yeah.
The first was a certain inner steely courage that even if you don't know there's a second shooter, the Secret Service is pulling you down, you pull yourself up against them. I mean, that's unbelievable in itself. That's a little win that can't be rehearsed. I think we all know that's a little window into Trump's kind of natural bravery. But look at the second one, because the normal reaction after the second one, first of all, is this is too much. I mean, they're going to keep doing this. I need to basically never appear in public again. Or if I do, I'm going to have a natural jitteriness because of what's happened now twice.
Right.
Instead, Trump is like a little annoyed that it's interrupted his golf game. He goes, I'm on the verge of making an amazing putt, and they're dragging me off the course. Now, I may be able to come back later, but who knows if I'd be in the same form to be able to hit like that, even though they're telling him there's a guy 2 holes down that's trying to kill him. And then he goes on social media and he posts 0 for 2. I mean, who does that? This is like almost like taunting would-be assassins. Like, you guys suck. I mean, you missed twice. Go back to the range. So only Trump would do this kind of thing, and I think it shows. I mean, in a way, it shows up even the Republicans. There's so many of them who say things like, well, I don't like his character, but I like his policies. And I'm thinking to myself, his character, the supreme virtue that's required in today's crisis is courage. He has that in spades. Any other Republican facing 2 criminal charges, let alone 91, would have long exited the race and fled the field. This guy not only survives and endures, he does major legal rope-a-dope. He ignores the gag orders. Somehow they can't get him. I mean, they're like Lilliputians trying to tie Gulliver down, and it's proving to be a really difficult task. So I think with Trump, it's almost like Republicans who are kind of naturally timid, natural born losers, if you will, finally have a guy who likes to fight. And is willing to fight on their behalf. And they're like, we're not sure about this guy. We think he needs to be more like us. And I'm thinking, if he were more like you, he'd be in the same miserable, pathetic position that you're in.
He did survive 2 assassination attempts, but sometimes people mispronounce Kamala Harris's name. So who's to say which requires more courage? So you interviewed him for this film. Can you tell people how he's different in person than people see him maybe on television or at a rally?
Yes, he is first of all, he's a surprisingly easygoing, nice guy. He's even a little self-deprecating, which is surprising because publicly he's famously egotistical. Yes. I will admit it. And not only is Trump egotistical, he measures his ego by public recognition, as well as things like the size of the stadium, and he's a natural salesman, but he's a natural salesman who's so over the top that it borders on the comedic. Like, the burgers at Mar-a-Lago aren't just good. They're like the best burgers ever made. His term in office wasn't just great. Nothing has ever been seen like that in America ever before, or maybe not even anywhere else. So this is Trump. He's like that. And you think that in private, he would be like a little insufferable, but he's not. And not only that, but he's not egotistical. He's actually genuinely curious about you. and not just about me, but he's genuinely curious about the doorman in one of his hotels, and he happens to know the name of the guy's kid and what the guy's studying in school. And so people are disarmed by all this. You notice, for example, the media, if they could find people who worked for Trump who hate him, they would be all over the
Oh, you're
place,
right.
right?
That's a
This guy
great
is a
point.
waiter
Yeah.
at the hotel.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
can't find those people. They can't find them, not just because Trump will walk through the doorway and hand out $100 bills, which he will do, but because of this personal curiosity and attention he gives to people that's quite remarkable. So that's one aspect of Trump that you see up close, that you're like, you know what? If more Americans could see this part of you, they would immediately warm to you.
That's such a great point because, he's been a fixture. I'm from New York City originally. He's a fixture in New York City culture for decades, and the amount of people he interacted with was limitless. So if he was this huge misogynist or racist, there would be, and especially at a time when it probably would have been more acceptable, and certainly he was in a political office, there would have been no shortage of people who were like, hey, I was the coat check girl at this club, and he groped me, and all this other stuff, and there's none. Which is really surprising because that would have been quite normal in the circles he traveled in. It certainly wouldn't have been comment worthy, and they'd come out of the woodwork years later. So I think that's a very interesting point. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as to that recent debate because, to your point, I thought Kamala Harris really was prepared because when she started making fun of his crowd sizes and he just couldn't help himself and started defending himself, I thought she really landed a very strong blow in that regard. And that's one of his big weaknesses.
Yeah, Kamala Harris is she's somebody who can be prepped
Yeah.
to have a pretty good grasp of quips, of data points, and she has good recall. So we shouldn't underestimate her in that sense. She's a pretty good debater, and she showed that not just with Trump. She had a pretty good debate against Mike Pence in 2020, and she came across looking pretty good. Trump, on the other hand, is impossible to prepare for a debate because he doesn't listen and he does his own thing. In fact, that is his style. One reason I made this film, by the way, Vindicating Trump, and wrote a book about him, is Trump doesn't make the case for himself. Reagan did. Reagan would stand up and basically go, here are the reasons why you should vote for me. Trump will do his shtick, but he doesn't give you the reasons uh, for his, not just a defense of his policies, but also a defense of his character. I mean, here's an interesting thing about Trump. People say Trump is a bully, and yes, he is. But guess what? He's only a bully to other bullies. He's an 800-pound gorilla, and he's willing to take on ABC News. He's willing to take on the Democrats. But you'll never see Trump bully some guy who works at his hotel. You'll never see him bully some guy on the street. Recently, Tim Walz gave the middle finger to some guy on
Yeah.
the street. Trump would never do that. Trump never bullies people who are smaller or beneath him. He only takes, he's willing, he doesn't like bullying, but he's willing to do it to other people who are, in a sense, in the same category as himself.
You mean Rosie O'Donnell?
Well, he'll take on Rosie O'Donnell because he knows that it isn't Rosie. There's a whole
Yeah, that's true.
establishment behind Rosie that's after him, and she symbolizes that establishment. So he'll make fun of her looks or of her weight. But if Rosie was just some person who came up on the street, Trump would never do that to her.
Um, One of the big criticisms of Trump, and I know you share this criticism to some extent, is that basically he drained the swamp by hiring it. And that a lot of his staffing decisions in retrospect were completely just baffling. Why Rex Tillerson, head of Exxon, becomes Secretary of State is something I've never heard anyone explain to me with any semblance of coherence. Um, but at the same, and as you put it out, Trump doesn't listen. But I've been very surprised to hear him basically explicitly saying that, you know what, like this is something I really effed up. And going forward, I'm really going to make sure to staff the White House with MAGA people or people who share my vision, as opposed to whoever has a great resume. But that resume just means they've been in Washington for 30 years and haven't been part of any sort of solutions. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what staffing in a second Trump term would look like.
I think Trump made two mistakes when he came in. One inevitable, and the other he should not have made. The inevitable one was simply that he was a complete outsider,
Yeah.
and you're coming into a structure that is, in a sense, unique, and that is the structure of the American bureaucracy. Trump had come with a kind of a corporate background. And I think Trump came in with a lot of the assumptions that probably I would have had if I were to come in like Trump. For example, he thought if I bring in a general, John Kelly, generals are people who like do what they're told. That's how you rise in the ranks of the military. So John Kelly will be the guy who gets things done. I will tell him to do it, he will do it. The idea that somehow generals could be conspiring against him, I think, was really beyond Trump's comprehension. Similarly with COVID, I think Trump thought, okay, there's obviously there's ideology in the media, there's ideology in academia and in Hollywood and so on, but surely we can trust the guys in the white coats. If they come and tell me there's an epidemic, I mean, look at it from Trump's point of view. He's got this roaring economy. It would almost take him inevitably to re-election. And then the doctors come in and tell him, you have to temporarily shut down the economy, otherwise all these people will die. And for all the people who say, and some Republicans will say of Trump, he only cares about himself. I just saw George Conway. This guy could care less about people. He could care less even about the country. It's all about Trump. And I'm thinking to myself, if it's really all about Trump, Trump would have said, I'm not shutting down the economy. It's my economy. This is what's going to take me to victory. This is the high tide that I'm going to carry through November. But Trump didn't do that. Trump was like, you know what? I think I have to shut down the economy, at least for now, till we figure out what's going on. And if it hurts me politically, so be it. So that example alone to me is, I think, an effective counter to the people who think it's all about him. That's all he cares about. Not really.
It was funny because that was Ruth Messenger when Rudy Giuliani ran for re-election in, it would have been, but 97. She was, I think, Manhattan Borough president. She's just the typical, like, New Yorker reader, ultra leftist. And her point was, I care about people. He only cares about himself. Well, if he only cares about himself and less people are getting murdered and robbed and assaulted, that's a great kind of selfishness that I think the average person can certainly endorse if the consequences are so beneficial. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as to the unprecedented nomination of Kamala Harris to the Democratic Party nomination. I think we're entering unprecedented times where it's harder and harder for political and media elites to hide their decision making and to kind of gloss over things they're doing that are untoward. It seemed pretty obvious to me that the Democrats and the media were kind of twisting the knife on Biden, and that he must have gotten some phone call that says, all right, if you're not going to do this the nice way, we're going to do this the not nice way. I would not want to cross Nancy Pelosi, any kind of street fight. That woman is a literal gangster and knows how to wield her power enormously effectively, as is Mitch McConnell. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as to, that process of how she became the nominee.
Well, I think what we learned from the sort of displacement of Biden and the elevation of Harris is something that we've suspected for a while, but can now be said explicitly and seen clearly. And in fact, it's a bit of a refutation of what you were saying a little bit earlier, where you said, I'm not so worried about Harris because she's not an ideologue, but I'm more worried about Walz. Because let me suggest that what we seem to be dealing with on the Democratic side, and it's not the same on the Republican side, is this. We're dealing with the new phenomenon that we have not seen before, and is not true of even the Democratic Party in the past, of having a regime control its nominees.
Yeah.
So the regime comes to Biden and goes, listen, you're nowhere to be seen in the primaries. We're going to move you to the front. That was in 2020. You're going to get the nomination. You're our man. You sit in the canoe. You're the face of the canoe, but you're not driving the canoe. We are driving the canoe. We tell you what to do. And apparently, and one addendum that was not really made clear, but became clear, if we ever tire of you and decide that you need to be ejected, we hit the eject button and you go willingly. I think Kamala Harris is coming in on the same deal.
Yes.
In other words, right? They said to Kamala, look, we're no primary. We're going to move you to the front. You're going to be our guy in the canoe this time. You're going to say what we tell you. Same with Tim Walz. And if, frankly, at some point we have to hit the eject button on you, you're going to have to go too. So what this really means is that in some ways, the nominee doesn't matter quite as much.
Yes.
Not that they don't matter at all, but that they are themselves getting direction from a regime. And hey, listen, we know from tyrannical societies that it is customary to have a regime. And sure, Xi is the head of the Chinese Communist Party, and I'm sure Xi has a great deal of power, but it's also true that the party controls him in the same way that perhaps he controls the party.
Folks, traditional bed sheets can harbor more bacteria than a toilet seat, which can lead to acne, to allergies, to stuffy noses, and it is gross. Miracle Made offers a full line of self-cleaning, eco-friendly bedding such as sheets, pillowcases, and comforters that prevent 99% of bacteria and require 3 times less laundry. They're infused with silver, and that prevents up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, which leaves them staying cleaner and fresher 3 times longer. No more gross odors. And by using these silver-infused fabrics, which were inspired by NASA, the Miracle Made sheets are thermoregulating and designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long, so you get better sleep every night. They're very comfortable without the high price tag of other luxury brands. Stop sleeping on bacteria. Miracle Made sheets are designed for your skin. Bacteria can clog your pores. It causes breakouts and acne. Sleep clean with Miracle. Here's all you got to do. Go to trymiracle.com/malice to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo Malice at checkout, you get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you aren't 100% satisfied, full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/malice. Use code MALICE to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/malice to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. Folks, sweater weather pairs perfectly with savory fall foods, but you got a busy schedule, so sometimes it's hard to eat the way you'd like to, and that's where Factor comes in, because their chefs do the shopping and the chopping to bring you fresh, never frozen, fully cooked meals right to your doorstep. You just got to heat it and eat it. All their meals are dietitian approved, so you know you're getting the nutrition you need along with those fall flavors that you crave. And when it comes to meals, everyone wants the same thing, and that is choice, because Factor offers 35 wholesome meals every week. They've got Gourmet Plus, Keto, Calorie Smart, Vegan, Veggie. You'll always find something you love that suits your lifestyle. No prep, no mess, delicious meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon delivered right to your door, ready in just 2 minutes. They sent me some. They're not lying. It's great, it's easy, and it's fresh. Head to factormeals.com/YourWelcome50, YOUR, and use code YourWelcome50 to get half off your first box, 20% off your next month. That's code YourWelcome50 at factormeals.com/YourWelcome50 to get half off your first box plus 20% off your next month. Let's get back to the show. What are your thoughts on J.D. Vance and how he's been performing as the vice presidential nominee? I'm specifically thinking of that great moment when, the first interview Kamala Harris had as the nominee was with Dana Bash of CNN. She brought her dad to work with her to sit there and kind of be her chaperone. And it was basically like, coaching her through the answers. It was, not exactly hard-hitting journalism, to put it mildly. And I think you and I, frankly, or anyone else who does podcasting would have done a better job giving the Kamala Harris position than Kamala Harris did herself. It's not just blame Trump and, distance yourself from Biden when necessary and hug him when otherwise. But then when she had J.D. Vance on, the knives were out, and he called her on it. And he goes, "You're not even letting me finish and talk." So I'm curious if you think he is a better, let's suppose, heir to the Trump legacy than Mike Pence had been.
Without a doubt. And the difference between, let's think for a moment about the difference between the Trump approach and, say, the Reagan approach. The Reagan approach was to put on a certain outward geniality. Even though Reagan knew that the press was extremely vicious, they were out to get him, Reagan pretended like they were not. Reagan pretended like, I can share a joke with Sam Donaldson. We're 2 Irishmen just swapping stories. Reagan basically tried to go above the fray. And he was very good at it because of his Hollywood background, the fact that he had quips ready in the quiver. So Reagan had a certain genius for being able to handle the press and be above the fray. Trump and Vance are in the fray, and their strategy is different. Their strategy is to call out the attack as it is being made.
Yeah.
And it is also to return insult for insult. Trump does this more than Vance. But Trump realizes that they're going to try to put names on him. He's the orange man. He's the mango Mussolini. He's this and that. Okay, well, you're going to be sleepy eyes, Chuck Todd, and you're going to be lying so and so, and you're going to be low rating CNN. And so Trump gives as good as he gets. And usually his names are more memorable than the ones that they try to put on him. Vance is a little bit more sort of urbane about it,
Mhm.
but I think he's also a street fighter at the end of the day. As by the way, I like to think of myself in the same mode, and my films are in that combative mode where they are taking on, if you will, the ethos of the mainstream culture. Because quite clearly, what's going on now is the media is putting on a massive Hollywood production of Kamala Harris, right? They're basically saying to the American people, look, we know you don't like the direction of the country. We know that normally that means you're going to throw the bums out. But what we want you to do is not believe your lying eyes. Don't believe your pocketbook. Don't believe the crime rates in your cities. Don't believe the hordes of people you see crashing over the border. Just pay attention to this kind of smoke and mirrors romance that we're creating with Kamala Harris. In other words, they're counting on the extreme gullibility and stupidity of the American people. And I have to say, in some ways, that is on the ballot in November.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you, but I think you're going to accept my correction. One of the things the media also did, and they saw that this happened very much in 1980, after Nixon's wage and price controls, the enormous inflation in the Ford, under Jimmy Carter, where things were a calamity, where inflation's to the roof, you had stagflation and unemployment. We were made fools of in our attempt to rescue our guys from Iran. The media narrative was like, this is inevitable. So whenever things go bad, they kind of give the impression that like this is just how things are. And then when Reagan came along, if you could sum up maybe his campaign in one sentence, he's like, we don't have to live like this, right? And for have that one politician be like, this is not normal, nor is it inevitable. And even if it is inevitable, at the very least, let's try to fight it as best we can. And you remember very well, after his debate with Carter, he goes, look, are your groceries more expensive than they were 4 years ago? Is there more food in the shelves? Do you have more money in your pocket? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? If not, there's one choice. And if yes, I may respect there's another one. So I think what Trump does and what they're trying to do is it's not at all a given. And Giuliani showed this, that our cities are going to be, revolving doors where someone who breaks an old lady's orbital sockets on the street the next day, where as long as you shoplift up to $900, it's not a felony. I mean, we're told in corporate outlets that this is a given. And it's just, that's probably one more brazen lies we're being told.
And I think Trump demonstrated in his first term, at least on a couple of notable
Mhm.
occasions, that things that were declared to be a given in the Middle East, for example, Trump almost made it look easy. He made the professionals look stupid. Because after all, they said this guy doesn't even know what's going on. He's going to propel the world into the abyss of war, and Trump showed that a certain amount of transactional shrewdness could actually bring amazing results. Now, the neocons never liked it because they go,
Right.
this is not how you do foreign
Right.
policy. It has to be done ideologically. But I think back, and as someone who has written a book on Reagan, that even Reagan had a transactional element to him that is often ignored or downplayed by the neocons. In fact, when Reagan was transactional, they opposed Reagan. Remember, Reagan was very tough against the Soviet Union in the first term, but he pivoted in the second term, and he was quite gentle with Gorbachev. He was almost luring him into the Reagan orbit, so to speak. And I remember Gene Kirkpatrick and Commentary Magazine and Norman Podhoretz and a lot of the neocons were bashing Reagan, saying, you're a fool. Don't you understand that the Soviet system, it doesn't matter who the leader is. They're all interchangeable and so on. And Reagan was like, no, I think I can actually get through to this guy. And Reagan was proven right. So my point is that there are some important distinctions between say Reagan and Trump, but there also are some similarities that often go overlooked.
And foreign policy is always a dirty business. And frankly, if sometimes we don't have good choices, no matter what country you are. And if the choice is killing people or paying off some crooks to have a more kind of docile and peaceful situation, give them as long as the crooks aren't murderous, that's perfectly preferable to having some kind of mass war where literally hundreds of thousands of people are killed and countries are destroyed. And these people don't lose any sleep about it at all.
Politics is foreign policy is almost always the politics of the lesser evil. It's so different than the philosophy seminar where you're choosing between good and evil. Very often in foreign policy, you're choosing between the bad guy and the really bad guy. And sometimes it makes sense to ally with the bad guy against the worst guy. I mean, there are all kinds of we allied with Stalin because Hitler posed a greater threat at the time. And so this is something that I think Trump instinctively realizes. And interestingly, you've got all these Ivy League grads who populate the State Department and the Defense Department, and somehow the Anthony Blinkens of this world, and they don't get it.
Per your movie and your book, and after talking with him at length, how do you foresee a second Trump term differing from a first Trump term?
The topic that I discussed with Trump in some detail, and I think it's a very interesting topic, is this one. Namely, given the fact that the claws of tyranny have not been fully mobilized, but nevertheless are tightening around us and have been really throughout the Biden years, the question I raised with Trump is, isn't it a fact that, just as in dealing with a bully, it makes no sense to try to appease the guy. It makes no sense to say things like, on principle, I refuse to respond to you in kind. If you
Yeah.
use violence, I will not use violence. That you have to do to them what they are doing to you, otherwise they will never stop. This issue I raised directly with Trump. In other words,
Yeah.
if 51 intelligence officials go essentially without any accountability, where's the incentive for them not to keep doing
Right.
those kinds of lies? If they can rig elections and get away with it, why would they ever dream of stopping? If they can pack the court and get away with it without us threatening to pack the court on our side, they will have no fear of us, because they'll be like, even if we fail in packing the court, those idiots are wedded to nine. And so they'll come in and hold the status quo, then we'll come back and try again.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, a very interesting tactical dilemma, because there are Republicans, and we know that it's the Paul Ryans of the world, the Mike Pences of the world. They're like, I'm better than that. The outlaws have guns. I refuse to go get my rifle. So there's a sense on the Republican side that we can't do what the other side is doing. We're better than they are. And that makes us the ideal kind of wimps. I almost think that the aggression of the left is tempted by the passivity of the Republican Party. I don't quite put it that way to Trump, but that's the underlying issue that we're talking about in the film.
And I think people may not realize this, and I'm sure you remember this as well. When George W. Bush came into office in 2001, one of the first things he did was to put a kibosh on any further prosecution, excuse me, or persecution, however you look at it, of President Clinton for his felonies, including perjury. He's like, all right, we're moving on. And this is not, I don't think, at all ever reciprocated. If you look at how many people, as you yourself, have been targeted by Justice Department and other such officials. You made a film discussing the illegitimacy in some ways of what you regard in the 2020 election. How confident are you that Republicans have put safeguards in place to make sure this election will be what you would regard as more fair?
I think the situation is much better. I also think that it is not easy to cheat the same way again and again, because
Yep.
once you know about something, it's much more hard to pull it off. If I was right in what I showed in 2000 Mules, and the left deploys mules in 2024, in the middle of the night with backpacks full of ballots, they're going to be Republicans and patriots waiting for them at the drop boxes. They're going to be with their iPhones ready to make some videos, which will be released immediately. So they can't rob Fort Knox the same way. Part of what I do in this new film, Vindicating Trump, by the way, the website is just vindicatingtrump.com. If you plug in your city or town, it'll pop up the theaters where it's playing, and the book comes out shortly. So get a copy. Get a copy from Amazon, or you can get one from the movie website. The point I'm making is this: that they're going to have to find new ways to cheat. And what we do in the film is I brought on a
Okay.
couple of investigators, and I said, hey, listen, show me where Fort Knox is still vulnerable. Show me where's the back door that is still left open. And the issue we discuss in the film, it's kind of a mind-blowing issue, is the section is called the ballot makers. And it has to do with whether or not you can actually make ballots. I mean, so crazy that I hesitate to even mention it, because I thought I was pretty knowledgeable about election issues, but this came as a total surprise to me. And these investigators told me, yeah, Dinesh, we can make 10,000 ballots. And I'm like, listen, don't come on the movie and say that, because no one will believe you. I want you to actually obtain the ballot stock. I want you to make the ballots. I want you to show me that these are ballots that will actually go into the tabulating machine and be counted. And so this is a eye-opening and kind of mind-blowing part of the movie. It's also discussed in a chapter in the book.
So I'm going to gun to head. What do you think will be the official electoral vote tally after the election?
I mean, I'm happy to venture a guess. I'm horrible at this, and this is certainly not my field. I don't pretend to be any kind of a prognosticator. Let me put it this way. I think that Trump is looking good. I trust the American people. People say the American people are super dumb. And there's obviously some evidence that will support that. But you take the average American guy and stick him in a movie theater, right? And you put on a very complex whodunit where you have all kinds of the obvious suspect is obviously not the person who did it. You throw in some clues and some false trails and red herrings and so on. The ordinary guy, you turn the lights out, is actually pretty shrewd in being able to make deductions. If it's not that guy, it can't be that guy. No, that doesn't really work. They're pretty smart at figuring stuff out. And I think the American people are pretty smart in being able to see that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, although they both are feigning authenticity, are two massive fakes. Whatever you think of Trump, he's not a fake. I mean, this guy is. It's like when God made this guy, he threw the mold away, right? This guy is very unique. He cannot help being unique. If Trump turned his social media over to you or me, we couldn't do Trump. People
Right.
would spot it in seconds because Trump, even his use of the typographical arts, the all caps, the
I have,
massive
sir,
exclamation points,
I have to
is so
correct you.
unique.
I have to correct you. I did that and I got 10,000 likes before I got community noted. Do you want me to read you the tweet? I know you're out the door, but do you want me to read you my Trump tweet and you
Go
could
for
tell?
it.
Okay, let me I'll find it. But I noticed, hold on, you gave me a little bit of a Kamala Harris answer. What is your number? And you're not saying this with any degree of certainty. I understand this. This is just a guess. What do you think his final number would be?
He needs 270. I'm going to guess he's going to get about 310.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think he's gonna get Pennsylvania and Arizona, and I think he's gonna get 2 out of the 4 of Virginia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota.
that would be huge. This would be amazing, and it would be such a rebuke given the massive deployment that has gone against him. For him to be able to take that on and prevail is going to be unbelievable. Let's just say it's going to be a great night.
Okay, this is my Trump tweet because I know you're out the door. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Dick Cheney was the worst vice president America's ever had until Comrade Kamala stepped into the White House. The two held the record for lowest approval ratings of any VPs in history, and with good reason. They belong together. Now his daughter, Liz Cheney, who some call Miss Piggy, has also announced that she's for Kamala. Liz was being driven out of the Republican Party after losing her primary by 40%. Liz, the war pig, a truly disgusting individual, never met an armed conflict she didn't like. She is happy to see our brave men and women in uniform slaughtered so she could buy herself another pig pen. And this is in caps. The Democratic Party is turning into a real freak show.
It's good. I like it. I like it. I'll close out the show with my own contribution to this genre, although I'm not here trying to do Trump.
Okay.
Here's my tweet, which I actually put out, and I think it'll leave you with a chuckle, and that is that I'm really not sure why Dick Cheney did what he did, because if there's one thing that Kamala Harris didn't need, it's another dick. All right, there you
The
go.
movie and book are called Vindicating Trump. Dinesh, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
Well, I just like the fact that it's a very engaging, intelligent conversation with somebody who has, not only lived through but taken time to study the issue. The issue of tyranny or dictatorship is the key issue in both the movie and the book. I build the argument off of Lincoln's prediction in the Lyceum speech, where he talks about if a dictatorship ever comes to America, it will come through mass lawlessness that is then exploited, as Lincoln says, by a Caesar or a Napoleon. We didn't really get into that in this conversation, but it's the background of the movie and the book. So it's just fun to be able to engage these issues with a very informed interlocutor. And so thanks for having me on.
You are welcome.
Hi, we're the Nemeth Bros. I'm Nick, and he's Ryan, and I'm a 20-plus year pro wrestling veteran, amateur comedian, F-list actor, wannabe lawyer, I once ate a 96-ounce steak, and we have a new podcast because we finally got some time on our plate called the Nemeth Bros. The Nemeth Bros.
Hey, Nick, what is this podcast about?
This podcast is going to be about stories from the road for the past 20-plus years of my pro wrestling career, winning world championships, injuries, everything in between that you can think of. Stories about you and I putting together a comedy tour, you and I doing skits, me being an F-list actor, on-set stuff, and of course, Q&A, answered questions in depth from the fans who want to hear them the most.
Hey, what if I want to have special guests on that are like famous comedians or showbiz types?
There's no rules. This is America. Bring them in.
Hey, if we're bragging about accomplishments, I have been an extra on Jimmy Kimmel Live 27 times. Follow, rate, and review the Nemeth Bros podcast at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Nemeth Bros.
I love reality TV on Pluto TV.
Same, and I love that it's free.
It gives me the freedom to watch Bravo's Real Housewives Vault channel.
I'm totally free to watch Bad Girls Club.
I'm free for Jersey Shore.
Love and Hip Hop, I'm free all day.
Survivor, I'm free all night.
With hundreds of free reality shows, you are totally free to watch what you love on Pluto TV.
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.